The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, welcome to the webinar, everybody. My name is Adam Messner. I'm the Director of Admissions at the University of Akron School of Law. And today we're just going to go through some Excel functions and features. And I think these are probably the most useful, or some of the most useful things that Excel has to offer. These are things that I use pretty much every day, and I just wanted to share them with you because I found over time that it was pretty surprising how much people didn't know about these kinds of things. But the things that we're going to talk about today are pretty powerful, and I think you'll find them very useful. If you have any questions as we go along, this is a little bit difficult for me because I'm going to keep everybody on mute. We have more than 50 people signed in right now. It will get a little chaotic to have everybody, to hear everybody's background noise and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to keep everybody on mute, but if you have any questions, you can type them into your chat. We have a little chat window there in the webinar utilities, so you can just type those in. I've got those open in another window, so as soon as I see them, I'll address them. I'm happy to go back and repeat things and whatever you need. There will be a recording of this as well, so if there's anything that you miss, you can go back and watch the recording. And if you want, I have some brief notes on this that kind of outline what we're talking about today, and I have some sample data that you should be able to see now. So if you want a copy of the sample data or my notes, I'm happy to email that to you. I'll put my email address up here in the chat, so just email me after the webinar if you have any questions or if you would like me to send this stuff to you. So I'm at apm@uakron.edu. So let's get started. The first function in Excel that I want to demonstrate that I think is particularly useful is called VLOOKUP. I'm just going to put it in the chat there so you know how to spell it. But basically what VLOOKUP allows you to do is that if you have data with records that are uniquely identified with, say, an LSAC account number or a student ID number, you can pull that data together into one table to make analysis a lot easier and a lot more straightforward. So what I've got here on this tab that you see is just a list of applicants. And these are just made-up people with randomly assigned LSAC account numbers and ID numbers and LSAT scores and things like that. One of the things that I'm asked to do sometimes, and I'm sure you're asked to do, is to look at how law school GPA compares to LSAT and undergrad GPA, just to kind of assess the predictive value of that. I know LSAC does that for us, but sometimes I know my faculty wants to see that, and they'll ask me to kind of pull those numbers together. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I've got my list of applicants here. What I'll do, I want to put my law school GPA over here in column J, so I'm just going to add a header up here at the top of this column called LGPA. Now there's a shortcut in Excel that allows you to quickly move in between tabs. If you hold down the Control key on your keyboard and press the page down button, you can move in between tabs without clicking. So I just tab down to the LGPA tab. This is kind of what it looks like when I run a query out of our student information system. We use PeopleSoft, and we can get a list of names and cumulative GPAs out of PeopleSoft using the query tool. So this is just kind of a sample of what that might look like. Now, if I want to bring it over to the Applicants tab, the long way around would be to, search for every single person on LGPA, find their GPA, come back over here and type it in. The idea with VLOOKUP is to get around that. So this automates that search and entry process. So what we want to do then is, if you're in a cell in Excel, you can type the equal sign. That's a signal to Excel that you're about to begin typing a formula. So you type equals, and then just start typing VLOOKUP. And notice you get this little pop-up down here. The Excel sort of guesses what you're trying to type when you're typing in a function. When you get that, and the function that you want is highlighted in blue, you can just hit the Tab key on your keyboard, and it will finish typing it for you. And then it gives you this little help box down here that shows you the arguments that make up this formula. So our first argument is lookup value. And what we want to do is take one of our unique identifiers and out of this table and look it up in the LGPA table. Now notice we actually have two unique identifiers in this table of applicants. We have the student ID number and the LSAC account number. Now outside of ACES 2, the LSAC account number isn't super useful, so we'll use the student ID number because that's what identifies these applicants uniquely in our student information system outside of ACES 2. So we want to look up this ID number. That's our first argument. After you finish typing an argument in a function, you just hit the comma, and that takes you to the next argument. So the next argument is table array. And what that means is that we've told Excel what we want to look up. Table array is where we want to look for that information. So we want to look for that over here in the LGPA tab. So we can just click over there. We don't need to worry about first name or last name. What we need to grab are columns C and D. Now when you are entering this argument into VLOOKUP, you always want to make sure that your unique identifier is in the first column of the array. So that's why I skipped over the first name and last name. I want to make the first column the array. So this is our array now. It's tab LGPA, columns C and D. So that's in now. We can hit comma to move on to the next argument. The first two arguments told Excel what we want to look up, where we want to look it up, and then this argument tells us what we want to return to the original sheet. So we want to, and this is a little bit tricky because you can't just enter, column D or whatever. You actually have to enter a number here. LGPA is in the second column of our array, so we want to enter the number 2, and then a comma. Now, the square brackets around this last argument, range lookup, that denotes an optional argument. When you're using VLOOKUP for this application, you never want to omit the last argument. You always want to enter the word true as your last argument. You always want to enter false as your last argument. So what that is telling Excel is that you want an exact match. If you use true, or if you omit the last argument, it's going to look for an approximate match, which in this kind of application causes all sorts of chaos. You're going to end up getting the wrong GPAs returned to the wrong rows, and so you always want to make sure that you enter false as your last argument in VLOOKUP. And then you can close this off by entering the right parenthesis, and you just hit enter. And look what happens. So Mallory Archer's GPA was returned as a 3.37. If you don't believe Excel is doing the right thing, you can always go back over to the LGPA table and notice her GPA is a 3.37. If you know anything about Excel, you probably have heard, at least heard about the concepts of relative references and absolute references. What we've got here in this first argument, C2, we've got relative references. Those are both relative references. An absolute reference would be denoted by a $, which we're going to look at those a little bit later. But what this means is that if we copy this formula elsewhere, this C2 is going to update to reflect the new location of the formula. These technically are also relative references, but notice we're selecting entire columns here, so we don't really have to worry about those. But we'll see a situation later where you want to have an absolute reference in your second argument of a VLOOKUP as well. So what I can do here is copy this. Now here's another shortcut in Excel. If you don't want to use your mouse, if you've got a cell selected and you hold down the Shift key and then the down arrow, you can just drag your selection all the way down to the end of your data and hit enter, and it will automatically copy those values into those cells. So rather than the painstaking process of going and looking up everybody's GPA and then typing it into this spreadsheet, we were able to bring them over in a matter of seconds using the VLOOKUP function. What I usually like to do after I complete a VLOOKUP is rather than having formulas behind these numbers, I like to replace them with the actual data that's returned. And so what you can do here, here's another shortcut. You can, if you hold down the Control key and then the Shift key, and you press the down arrow, that will select all of the data in that column until it hits an empty cell. So if you do that and then you copy and you come up here to paste, and you choose this paste option, paste values, notice what we have now. Instead of a formula behind that 3.37, we've just got the value 3.37. And the reason I do that is that if you leave a bunch of formulas out there with relative references and things get changed, then that can change the data in this sheet too. We don't want that to happen. We want these to stay as just static values. So that's just kind of like an extra fussy little thing that I do just to ensure the integrity of the data. I've got a question from Melanie. Can you go over the column index num again? Sure. Yeah, let's just type in the formula again. VLOOKUP, our lookup value is in C2, comma, and then our table array is over here, column C and D of the LGPA field. Okay, now this is tricky. This is something that takes a little bit of thought to understand. What this is telling, what you're telling Excel with the column index number argument is which column do I look in to find the value that I want to return to the original spot where you want it to go. You've got two choices here because your array is composed of two columns, columns C and D. What you ultimately want to happen is for Excel to return the value in the second column back to the first spreadsheet. So again, rather than clicking on a column, you actually have to type a number in. So we want the value in the second column to be returned. And then we enter false. Always enter false for that final argument. Does that help? Okay. So you hit enter, and there we go, 3.37. All right. So we're going to come back to this applicant sheet in a minute, but another thing that I want to go over is it's not really a function. It's more of just a feature of Excel called a pivot table. And this is a way that there are tons of applications for pivot tables, but one of the really great things that I think they can do is to summarize data. So if you, and I'll show you what I mean. This is when I run a query out of my student information system, PeopleSoft, I get something that looks like this. So if I don't limit the query by year or type of financial aid, I get, like if we look at Sterling Archer, for example, he's got 12 rows associated with him because he's been in law school for 3 years, and every year he's received an alternative loan, a federal direct loan, a Grad Plus loan, and a scholarship every single one of those 3 years. So he's got 4 rows for every year. So if you want to summarize the amount of financial aid that he's received over 4 years, or the amount of scholarships or whatever that he's received for 4 years, that could be a pain if you were to do that manually. I mean, you'd have to, come through here and look for every row where he's got a scholarship, or if you're summarizing alternative loans, you'd have to look for that row. So pivot table makes that much, much easier. The way to do that is to select the data that you want to summarize. And again, we have these little shortcuts where we can, if you hold down the Control key and the Shift key on your keyboard and then the right arrow, that will select that entire top row. And then if you hold the Control and the Shift key on your keyboard and then hit the down arrow, that will select downward until Excel encounters empty cells. And then what you want to do is come up here to the tab, or to the Insert tab, and just click Pivot Table, and it will bring up a wizard. Oh, and I see Annika has a question about VLOOKUP. I'm just going to pause here and answer that because that's a quick answer. You can use, if you're using VLOOKUP, you can reference data in other workbooks. I think that gets a little bit complicated, though, so if I'm going to do that, usually I'll just create a new tab in the workbook that I'm working in and copy the data from the second workbook into the one that I'm working in. But yeah, you can reference other files. You can reference other Excel files. That's allowable in VLOOKUP. And then I've got another question. How did you get the pivot table box? Okay, let me do that again. All you need to do is select your data that you want to summarize. Come up here to the Insert tab, and I'm working in Excel 2013 here. It's pretty much the same in Excel 2010, but there's a tab at the top in your ribbon labeled Insert. If you click on Insert and then just click the Pivot Table button, you've got it. So the first thing that the wizard will ask you to do is to select your range, which we've already done, so we can skip that. Sometimes you might find it useful to put your pivot table in a new worksheet, which is the default option here. But just to keep things simple, I'm going to keep this in the existing worksheet. So if you want to do that, you click Existing Worksheet, and then you just have to pick a cell where you want to put the upper left corner of it. So I'm just going to put it up here over in column I. And then you click OK. And now you get this little region here, which is where your pivot table will go. And then you have this little sidebar over here, which has all of your fields in it, and these 4 little quadrants down here that will allow you to summarize and slice and dice your data in different ways. So what I want to try to do is, rather than have 8 or 10 or 12 rows per applicant here, I want 1 row per applicant that shows how much financial aid money they've received over the course of their entire legal education. And then we can filter it later, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So in the rows quadrant, I will just drag the ID field from right up here, drag it down to rows, and now you see each person has their own row label. Each person, instead of having, Sterling Archer doesn't have 12 rows anymore. He's just got 1. So everybody's got 1 row now. And then I think what I'll do is to put the aid type across the top in columns. And if I do that, then I can see how much of each type of aid each person has received over the last 3 years. And then if I take the amount and I drag that down into the values area, now I've got a summary of everybody's financial aid over the course of 3 years. This is just another fussy thing that I like to do when I'm working with dollar amounts. If you come up here on your Home tab and then select Currency, that'll add the dollar signs and the commas and all that stuff. I just think that makes it easier to read. All right. So now, one other thing you could do with this. This is a summary of financial aid received over the course of 3 years. If you want to filter it by year, you can take this year field and drag it into the filter area, and then that gives you this little filter area right up here above your pivot table. If you, let's say we just want to look at 2013, 2014, just the last year, we can click OK, and it filters everything out for us. I think a great application of this is when you're filling out the ABA questionnaire, and it asks you how much money did your students borrow in the last year. This is it. I mean, you can answer that as long as you can get the data out of your student information system. You can answer that question in under 5 minutes using a pivot table. And then U.S. News still asks how much money did your graduates borrow over the course of 3 years in law school. This is another great application for that. And I'm going to show you how to kind of pull that data together in just a second here. I'm going to remove this filter. We're going to go back to where we started. Now here's, again, I do a lot of little fussy things with Excel that I'm not totally sure are absolutely necessary, but they make me feel better about it. So because a pivot table is very kind of fluid and it's easy to change, usually what I like to do when I have the data looking exactly the way I want it is I will select the entire pivot table and then just come over right next to it, or maybe in a new worksheet even, and just paste it as values. And that avoids kind of the same problem that we had with those formulas back at the beginning of the presentation, where if you copy the results of the formula and you paste them as values, then you don't have to worry about those changing if the underlying references change. So now over here, all we have is data. We don't have any formulas or any pivot table behind that. All right. So now what I want to do, I've also got a list of graduates over here. All right, so this is my list of graduates. What I want to do is to try to answer that question on the U.S. News Survey as to how much money people borrowed throughout the course of law school. So we've got 3 categories of loans. We've got direct, plus, and alternative. We're going to use a VLOOKUP to bring those from the financial aid worksheet over into the graduates worksheet. So we'll start with direct loans. We start with the equal sign and then start typing VLOOKUP. If you hit tab, that brings up your arguments. Our lookup value is our student ID number. We hit the comma to get to the next argument, and then we can go back over here to the financial aid sheet. Our table array is right here, columns P through U. And then we're looking at direct loans, so that's, here's column 1, column 2, column 3. So we want to return the value in column 3, so we'll enter that for our third argument, and then range lookup is always false. Okay, so now notice instead of getting a value, we got this little error message. When your VLOOKUP doesn't work for some reason, this is what you get. You get the pound sign followed by NA. And that can mean one of 2 things. Either that, that data, this ID number, just doesn't exist in the array that you're searching in. That's a possibility. I made this data, so I know that value is there, so I know that's not right. But in the real world, when you're really using this and you get that error, you have to think, well, maybe that data just isn't appearing. Maybe she just didn't receive any financial aid. But I know she did, so it's got to be a different problem. Now, if you look at the way this ID number is formatted, notice there's a little green triangle in the top left corner of every one of these ID numbers. And what that means is that there's some sort of error. And if you mouse over this little warning thing, it will tell you what the error is. So it says the number in this cell is formatted as text or preceded by an apostrophe. And what that means is that this, rather than being formatted as a number that you can do arithmetic on, it's formatted as text. So it's formatted just the same as basically Excel is treating that as text. It's treating that as the same as it would letters, basically. And it gives you this little green triangle here because the default is for Excel to treat numbers as numbers. You can do statistical and arithmetic operations to them, but when they're formatted this way, you can't do those things. So now let's go over to the financial aid sheet and look at the numbers. Look at the ID numbers there. So notice there's no little green triangle in the upper left corner of these ID numbers. So that's the second thing that could be wrong. If you're using a unique identifier that is a number, and you've got one area where the ID number is formatted as a number and the other area where the ID number is formatted as text, you're going to get an error. And that seems like kind of a disaster, but it's actually really easy to fix, and I'm going to show you how. So what we'll do in this, on the financial aid sheet, what we'll do is select this data. And again, if you come up to the top of the data that you want to select, hold down Control, Shift, and then hit the down arrow. That'll select everything. Come up here to your Data tab in Excel and click on Text to Columns. This is a really quick way to convert a bunch of numbers to text, or vice versa. You can convert numbers stored as text back to numbers stored as numbers. You can convert numbers stored as numbers to dates, or text to dates. It's really really pretty powerful data manipulation tool. So what I'm going to do is convert all these numbers to text so that they match the formatting of the other sheet. When you click the Text to Columns button, you get this wizard. The default option is to choose delimited here. It doesn't really matter in this situation, but I'll show you a situation later where it does matter. So use the delimited option, click Next. I just always use Tab, and that's going to be the default type of delimiter there. Again, it doesn't really matter in this situation because we're not splitting any data up. We're just converting stuff to text. So just leave the tab box checked, click Next, and then this is important. What this step is asking you to do is how do you want the data to be formatted after we go through this operation. So if you click Text and then click Finish, notice all those values are suddenly left justified, and there's this little green triangle up in the top left corner. So that means all those values now are available as are stored as text. Carrie just asked a question if this webinar will be available to view again later, and it will. Vanessa's recording it, and so if you want to come back and view the recording at some point in time in the future, you can do that. So now we have, we've got another question from David. He's asking if the column names because the column names don't exactly match, will that create a problem? No, that is not going to create a problem at all. And in fact, let's go back over to the Graduates tab, and we can see in the Direct column, we've got 88,500. So instead of that error message, we got a number, which is great. That's exactly what we want. All right, now, remember earlier, I was talking to you about relative references and absolute references. And now here's a situation where you want to pay attention to relative and absolute references. So notice we don't have any dollar signs up here in front of these arguments. What I want to be able to do is to copy this formula over into columns F and G. But if I do that, notice we're not looking for C2 anymore, we're looking for D2. And we're not looking in columns P through U anymore, we're looking in columns Q through V. That's a problem. We don't want that to happen. So what we can do then is put a little dollar sign here because we don't want column C to change. And then we don't want our target array to change, so we'll put little dollar signs there. And then if I copy that over, notice I'm getting the same number in all three columns. Now all I have to do is modify these formulas a little bit to return a value in a different column. So if I go back over to my financial aid table, my alternative loans are in column 2 of that array. So I can change this argument to 2, and I'll get my alternative loans. And then my plus loans are in column 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I change this argument to 4, now I've got my plus loans. And then, if I want to get a total on loans for each student, I can come over here into column H, put the total header up here. If I go back to my Home tab, I can click the Auto Sum button, and it's automatically going to pick up all those numbers to the left of to the cell that I'm in. If I hit Enter, now I've got total loans for Mallory Archer over the course of 3 years. I'm going to change these to currency just to make them a little more pleasant to look at. And then if I select all these cells, copy them, go all the way down here, hit Enter, I've just calculated total borrowing over the course of 3 years for all of my graduates in under 5 minutes. Again, these are all backed up by formulas, so we want to copy those and paste them as values, just so that those are static and they're not going to change if the values underlying the references change. That was kind of a lot. So does anybody have any questions before I move on to the next thing? Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste these as values. Now notice all those formulas that we typed in and copied and pasted are gone. If you look up here in the formula box, those are all, it's just all static data now. Now there are some other functions that you can use. I don't know that anybody ever asks for this, but I do it for our website because I think it's useful for people. If you want to, say, get the average debt, you can use the average function. Again, just type equals. And then come over here and select the total column. Hit Enter. So our average debt at graduation was $99,346. You can do a median. Just type equals and start typing median. And you tab. Select the same range of data. Our median debt is $91,613. You can do percentiles. And we've got, there are two functions here, percentile.exe and percentile.inc. Somebody asked yesterday, or Monday, what the difference was between those two. And I looked it up. It's kind of an esoteric math thing that I don't know if I could really explain adequately, but what I gather is that percentile.exe is more accurate. So if you're going to calculate percentiles in Excel, this is the function you want to use, percentile.exe. And it's kind of the same concept. Actually, I'm going to do this over here. It's kind of the same concept. You select your array. This one has a second argument, though. So if you want to do the 25th percentile, you type in 0.25. So our 25th percentile is 83,627. And if we want to do 75th percentile, you use percentile.exe again, select the same array, and then 0.75 is your second argument. So our percentile, 75th percentile is 117,965. You can use this on LSAT scores, GPAs, salaries, whatever. It's really useful stuff. Okay. Here's another thing that sometimes people want me to do, and maybe people at your school want you to do as well. They want you to look at bar results and compare bar results to various things. So it could be compare bar results to cumulative law school GPA, or compare them to undergrad GPA, or LSAT, or index, or grades in certain classes. And that sometimes presents a problem because, again, you've got these bar results that probably come from your state Supreme Court or bar admitting office, and then you've got this other data from your applicant pool, and it's kind of time-consuming to put the two together, especially if you have a lot of graduates and a lot of people taking the bar exam. So what we're going to try to do now is to use VLOOKUP again to bring bar results over into the applicants table. All right. Now, here's my bar results sheet. And this is pretty much what our bar results look like when we get them from the state. There are no unique identifiers. There are no Social Security numbers, ID numbers, LSAC account numbers. It's just names and whether or not they passed or failed. And that's kind of a problem because over here on our applicants table, we have these unique identifiers. We need a way to get those over into the applicants table. And again, the long way around would just be to go to your bar results table, look up everybody's results and type them in here. And you can do that. We have 36 people in this table, so it probably wouldn't take that much time to do. But if you're dealing with 100 or 150 or 200 people, it could take a long time. And so this is a way that you can, this is a method that you can use to kind of get around that. You can actually create your own unique identifier. And so what I want to do, if you come back over here to the bar results table, look at how the names are formatted. It's last name, comma, first name. And then over here in the applicants table, our names are split into two fields. So we've got first name is one distinct field from last name. So now what we can do is we're going to introduce a new function here called concatenate. I'm just going to type it out in the text or in the chat box here. And I'll actually create a new field over here just called name. The concatenate function is a text manipulation function. So you can use concatenate to take small bits of text and stick them together to form large strings of text. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to create a name field that matches the name field over in the bar results table. So to use this, again, you just type equals and then start typing concatenate. You don't have to remember how to spell it because Excel sort of guesses what you're trying to type. You just hit tab and that'll enter the rest of the function for you. So now your arguments here are just your text strings. So we want last name, and then comma to get to your next argument, and then first name. And notice it doesn't quite look like what we see over in the bar results table. We've got Archer, Mallory, just kind of stuck together. We come over to bar results. We've got Archer, comma, Mallory. So if we try to do a VLOOKUP using that, it's not going to work because the two are slightly different. And what we can go do over here is to add our own custom text in the middle of those two arguments. Now in Excel, if you want to add in custom text into the concatenate argument, as long as you enclose it in quotes, it will just return whatever you type in. So if I type quotes, I just typed a full set of quotation marks, and I'm going to put some text in the middle. Just type custom text. Now look what happened. Archer, custom text, Mallory. We can, what we want in there really is just a comma and then a space. So I'll get rid of custom text and just type a comma there. So that looks a little crazy in the formula box. You've got B2, comma, and then quotation marks, comma, space, quotation marks. That's actually our second argument, that little comma inside the quotation marks, and then A2 is our third argument. Now if you hit enter, that's exactly what we want. We've got last name, comma, first name. So we can grab that, copy it, select all the way down and hit enter, and now we've got everything we need. Again, I prefer to have static data, so I will copy these and then paste it as data, so we don't have formulas underlying these things. And now we can do our VLOOKUP. Come over into column K, type equals, start typing VLOOKUP, and then tab. The value that we want to look up is in cell L2. And then our table array is over here in bar results. So we'll come over here and select our array. Notice our unique identifier is in the first column, exactly the way we want it. And then we want our column index number is 2, because the bar results are in column 2 of this array. And then we always want to type false at the end. Here we go. Mallory Archer passed the bar exam. And we can copy down. And let's see if this works. Okay, so it looks like we've got a few errors. And so remember I was telling you that there are two reasons that you could have errors. You could have, if you have a number that's your unique identifier, if it's formatted as a number in one location and it's text in a different location, you're going to get errors. Or if the value you're looking for doesn't exist in the array that you're searching, you're going to get an error. So let's start with the first one, Tony Drake. And let's come over to bar results and try to find Tony Drake. So Tony Drake's name is actually Anthony Drake in the bar results. So there's our problem. Tony Drake doesn't exist in the source data. Anthony Drake does. So we can come back over here to our applicants table. Let's just change our key to Anthony Drake. And there we go. That worked. We've got a problem with Tom Haverford. Come back over to bar results. He's Thomas Haverford on the bar results. So if we go back over to applicants and we change Tom to Thomas, the error goes away. And then Ben Wyatt, let's go over to bar results. Looks like he is listed as Benjamin Wyatt. So let's go back over to our applicants and change that key. There we go. So now we've got our bar results all over here. Copy it, paste it as values, and we're all set. Now, you could do all sorts of great analysis on this, and I'm not a statistician. I have very basic knowledge of the kinds of things you could do here, but and it wouldn't mean anything anyway because all these LSAT scores and GPAs and stuff are randomly assigned. So if I did that, it would look pretty crazy and probably not very meaningful. But this is good data. I mean, this is somebody, if you have a statistician that does this kind of thing for you, or a grad assistant that knows stats, or whatever, or if you yourself are good with stats, this is good data that you can take and actually work with. And again, we were able to pull all this together in just a few minutes using VLOOKUP and using concatenate to create a custom unique identifier. So the two data sets kind of matched up. Any questions at all so far? All right. I think that's pretty much it for the power stuff. But I do have a few other things that I want to show you that I just think are kind of cool things to do, and actually are kind of powerful in their own right. One of the things is we talked about the text to columns tool. Oh, Melanie has a question. Can you remind us how to select an entire row of data? Yeah, if you want to select an entire row, if you hit Control, Shift, and then the right arrow, that will select the entire row. If you want to select an entire column, Control, Shift, and the down arrow, and that will get the entire column of data. And then to switch in between tabs, if you do Control Page Up, that will go to the left. Control Page Down will take you to the right. Let's see. Oh, and David has a question. Can you fill in multiple empty columns, so looking for 2+ data points using a VLOOKUP? You can't do that at the same time, but that's kind of like what we did over here on the graduates table. So we just did one VLOOKUP here under the direct loan header, and then if you set your references up right, you can just copy that over to the other columns and just change the third argument in the VLOOKUP formula, and that'll get you where you want to go. Does that make sense? So I can just do this again. If I go VLOOKUP, if I want to look up C2, my table array is over here, and my column index number is 3, false. So that, I mean, you can only return one value there. But then if I set this up so that the column is an absolute reference and the table array is an absolute reference, then all I have to do is come over here. Notice it's the exact same formula, but I want to return the plus, the value in the plus column. So instead of using 3 as my column index number argument, I'll use 4. So in that sense, you can do that, but the VLOOKUP is only going to return one value. But if you're strategic or you're clever about how you set up your formula, you can return multiple values without too much extra work. So I just want to show you a couple other little text manipulation things that I've found pretty useful. Now let's say what we did in that last exercise where we brought bar results over to the applicants table, we used the concatenate function to to basically stick smaller strings of text together into one big string. We're going to do the opposite here. So let's say for whatever reason we wanted to split these names into 2 fields. So right now the name is in one field. Let's say we want to split it into 2 fields. So we can just select the data, come up here to the Data tab in Excel, and then click Text to Columns. So we've been through this already, but we're going to do something a little bit different with it this time. So we click that, and the wizard comes up. Now, we have 2 options here. We have delimited, which it's pretty self-explanatory. Characters such as commas or tabs separate each field. So it's pretty clear what's going on here. We've got a comma-delimited set of data here. So the comma is what's separating the first name from the last name. Fixed width would be like, if you had a data where every row was the same width, and you could predictably split it at a certain number of characters. That's a little bit more tricky and complicated to do. So we're going to treat this as delimited data. So we click on Next, uncheck the tab box, and if we check comma, notice what we have down here in the data preview window. It's going to split these right in half, or not right in half, but right at where the comma was. Then click Next. We can just leave this on General in Step 3 because all this is text. We don't really have to worry about how it's formatted. There we go. Now we have 2 columns of data. Now notice that we've got an extra leading space here. And to get rid of that, you can use another function called trim. And that just basically wipes out any extraneous spaces. So we can come over into the next field, or the next cell rather, and type trim. And then select the text in the cell right next to it and hit Enter. And notice it's a subtle difference, but you can see it. You've got a leading space here and no leading space here. Again, this is just me being fussy, but I think this kind of thing, if you can get rid of extra spaces and that kind of thing, it makes things look a lot easier to read and a lot more professional. So you can come over here, copy those as values back on top of the original data, and get rid of this. We can label these fields now. All right. I'm going to show you just a couple other things here that I think are kind of useful. One of the things that I've noticed in ACES 2 is that when you run queries and you include the undergraduate school name, they come out in all caps, which I don't really like. I just don't think it looks that nice. So in Excel, there's a function. There are actually a few functions that allow you to change the case of words. And so usually what I do, if I want to make this look a little bit nicer, I'll come over here and use a function called proper. If you just type proper and then select your text and hit Enter, notice all those capital letters are gone. I guess one little quirk of that is that if you have an of in there, it's going to capitalize that. I can show you how to get rid of that too. So there we go. Now we have nicely formatted undergraduate schools instead of all caps. Now if you want to get rid of those ofs, let's just copy that and paste it as values. Let's select that data again. And one of your shortcuts in Excel, and this actually works in most programs, if you hit Control-H, it's the same in Microsoft Word. Control-H will bring up Find and Replace. So if we type space, capital O-F, space, and replace it with lowercase o-f, space, and then replace all, that'll remove all those capital ofs. Okay, one last thing. Oh, and there are other, I'll show you this too, because people asked about this on Monday. There's another function called upper. So if for whatever reason, if you had, your data looks like this and you want to make it all uppercase, you can use the upper function. Now it's back to all uppercase. There's also a function called lower, which predictably changes all your text to lowercase. If you ever just want to play around and search for these different functions, if you hit F1 on your keyboard, it will bring up help. If you just search for list of Excel functions, your first hit is what you want. And there are hundreds of functions in here that you can use. Most of them you won't need, but I think this is probably your best list of Excel functions available. There are tons. Like if you click on text function, there are tons of ways to manipulate text and get different values out of text. Holly has a question. What if you want to just uppercase the first letter of a first name? Is that possible? Yes, that's what proper does. So, well, I guess if you, let's say, if you wanted to do that to the University of Montana and just uppercase the U and not uppercase anything else, You can't do that, unfortunately. So if you have, 2 words in a cell and you use the proper function, it's going to capitalize all of the words. There isn't like a title text function in Excel, unfortunately. But you probably could do some clever things with like splitting data into multiple columns and then using those upper and lower functions and then concatenating again, which sounds like a lot of work, but if you're doing that to a lot of data, it's really very useful. One last thing I want to show you is just the left, and we'll do left and right just for the sake of illustration. Let's say I want to, for whatever reason, abbreviate full-time as FT and part-time as PT. There's another text manipulation function in Excel. If you type left, you can take, basically what this will do is your target, if you select your target text, and then in your second argument, just tell it the number of characters that you want. We just want 1 character. That'll just return the F from full-time, and then the P from part-time. And if we nest that inside a concatenate function, we've got FT and PT. And you could do that from within ACES too as well. If you just kind of, most of the fields have like a report characteristic that you could do an abbreviated version of that. But this is useful for if you've already run the query and you've maybe manipulated it a little bit. You don't want to go back and start all over from your raw data out of ACES 2. You can just manipulate the text around and get what you want. So I'm just about out of time. I'm at 51 minutes, it looks like. So we've got about 8 or 9 minutes left for questions. So if you have any questions, let's just use the remaining time for that. Just again, we're going to keep everybody on mute, but if you just want to type them into the chat box, I'd be happy to answer those. And again, if you want any of this information, you have any questions for me, or you want me to email you the sample data, I'm happy to do that. Again, my email address, put it in the text or the chat box. apm@uakron.edu. Heather asks if I use macros. I do sometimes. I used to use them a long time ago, and then I found that Access can do a lot of the things that you would do with macros in Excel. And sometimes Excel macros, at least in my experience, have behaved kind of unexpectedly. So I don't really like to rely on them. But I do use them sometimes, and they can be useful in certain applications. Lauren asks, can you remind us why you need to put false at the end of VLOOKUP? False indicates to Excel that you're looking for an exact match. So if you're looking to match data from the applicants table and the LGPA table, what you're telling it when you put false in is that you only want Excel to return a value if the 2 ID numbers match exactly. Okay, if you leave that argument out or you put true, it will return, it'll do an approximate match and it might return the wrong value. Rachel says, what about right, mid? Yes, those are different from left. Right kind of works the same way as left. I mean, if you just say right and then pick your text in 1, what that will do is instead of counting from the left side of the field, it'll start counting from the right. So this should return a lowercase e. And then mid is, again, you want to select your target data, but you have 3 arguments here instead of 2. So you have to select a starting location within the string. So if we start at character 2, and then you have to select the number of characters to return. So let's say we want to return 4 characters. So it started at the second character in full, which is U, and it returned a total of 4 characters. So that can be useful too in various scenarios. I use left, right, and mid quite a bit. Okay, Colleen's question. State again what happens when you put info in the quotation marks. Oh, okay. Yeah, what that means is that you want to, if you're using concatenate, you're manipulating text. If you want to put custom text in, so that is text that's not in a cell somewhere, you need to enclose that custom text in quotation marks. So what I'm doing here, this argument within concatenate, this left I2, 1, what that's returning is the F in full time, and then this T inside quotation marks is returning a capital T for time. Lauren Gold, do you know of a keyboard shortcut to copy a formula down a column? I'm sure that exists, but I don't know it. And usually what I do when I'm copying a formula is I just copy it, and if I have a kind of a short data set like this, I'll just hold down the shift key and the down arrow and run down the column. Or if I have hundreds or something like that, I'll either scroll down or use the scroll bar, and then if you hold the shift key down and click the bottom cell in the range that you want to copy into, that'll select all the cells in between the top and the bottom. And you just hit enter to paste. And if you format your data as a table, a lot of times it will do a lot of things automatically for you. But I didn't do that here. I'm just kind of using the basic ranges here instead of tables. Feel free to post them if you've got any other questions. We've got a few more minutes left. And if not, you're welcome to log off. And I appreciate your attention. Hope you found this useful. The key to getting good at this stuff is just mess around with it, practice as much as possible. That's how I learned it. And eventually, stuff like this it seems complicated now, but if you do it enough, it's like second nature. Yeah, I'm a fussy person when it comes to data formatting. Especially, that looks a lot nicer if you're doing name tags or running mailing labels or something like that. If you could figure out a way to tweak the data so it looks a little bit more professional, I don't know. I just think that's pretty satisfying. Well, Kelly has a question that just came up. This is a different question, but a spin-off. Is there a way in a pivot table to display something other than a numeric value in the values area? I don't think there is in Excel. Access actually has some pretty powerful pivot table tools, though. I've kind of gotten away from Access just because I think it's a little bit unwieldy. But yeah, you can do that in Access to some extent. But in Excel, it will either provide. I mean, you can summarize the data in different ways. Like, notice down here in the values quadrant, it says sum of amounts. So by default, it just sums the data. But you can do averages and counts and that kind of thing too. You can do some pretty sophisticated things with pivot tables. You can also make pivot charts, which are pretty fun. But I just didn't. I was kind of just trying to keep it as basic as possible, so I didn't get into that today. Michael, when is your creating graphs charts within from Excel webinar? I'll do that. I love graphs and charts. If you guys are interested, let me know, and we could do this again. That would be fun. I think that's our time. I don't want LSAC. I'm not sure if LSAC is going to get billed overtime for this. So I think we're probably going to disconnect this. But like I said, if anybody has any questions, or if you want the data or my notes, let me know, and I'll be happy to send that to you. And I appreciate all your attention today. That was this was really good, and you guys had a lot of really good questions, so thank you.